All right, welcome everyone. We are setting up our first talk here on Twitter Spaces. My name is Bobak Khayeri. I am handling the host duties tonight. We have a full slate of things we're going to be getting through today. We're going to be joined by Shehan, Jeyarajah, and JD. Welcome. Thank you for bringing up here.
Temple.
Temple indeed. So there's a lot of things going on tonight. We wanted to just first kind of warm ourselves up as we get ready. This is our first time using Twitter Spaces. We previously had 7 different talks using Reddit's native app. That was interesting, but we hope that Twitter, with its slightly more established speaking platform, will give us a little more stability. So we're going to give that a try and see how it goes. We'll try and possibly take some questions from all of you. And we try to run this a little bit like a sports talk with guests and with voices we hear from the rest of you. So thanks again for joining us. Let me go ahead and welcome there. So JD, let's talk what's going on right now as we kind of warm up here. What topics other than Temple have been on your docket these days?
Well, first and foremost, it's a fun time to be back on a talk with y'all. It's a fun time to be on Twitter Space for the first time. I think we had a lot of fun and a lot of success on Reddit's native app, and we're really looking forward to seeing what happens with this audience. But when I look at the headlines today, man, there is a lot that is going on. We're about to get into early signing day tomorrow. So all of these coaching changes that have happened, all these administrators who have thrown money out the windows at assistant coaches, at new programs, at new facilities are about to start seeing the reaping of all of that effort. And I do have a game that I want to play with you and some of our friends on here in just a moment. But more importantly, on the headlines, Bobak, first and foremost, Pony Express is back. SMU announced today with a new NIL deal. Eric Dickerson, of all people, the famed original Pony Express master himself, actually announced that SMU is going to start a $1 million annual NIL fund for their student athletes. And man, if you could go back in time to the days of the original Pony Express and tell those boosters that you can now actually pay players and SMU is allowing them to organize around it. What a time to be alive in this sport.
Absolutely. I think this is one of those moments where I guess they were ahead of the curve. They were a couple of Trans Am lengths ahead of the curve on this particular one. So I'm excited for it. It'll be interesting to see. I know some coaches weren't thrilled with that. We saw, and I'm going to see if we can share this tweet. There was a tweet by the UCF coach that was not thrilled about it. Did you see that one?
Indeed, I did.
Yeah, and so anyway, should we go ahead and bring up our guest?
Well, first, I think SRS should be somewhere around here, our fellow co-host, if we can get him up and going first.
I know he's trying to get his app working right now, so we may not be quite ready yet.
Well, in the meanwhile, though, there we go.
All right. Sorry, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. This is our first time using Twitter Spaces. We were previously using Reddit's own native app, which had its own vices, and we thought this might be a little more appealing. While we're doing that, I also just wanted to announce that we are in the middle of our holiday drive. Now, we're always excited. It's something we do every year. Everyone in our CFB gets together. We raise money for charity. So far, we've raised about $6,600. I'm not asking you to come and join it. If you do, great. But it's something we're proud of, and we do it. And the money goes to putting bricks over on various campuses. It goes towards Toys for Tots, and it goes towards children's hospitals. So this is our 7th time doing it, and we're really excited about that. So, SRS, are you able to hear us now? Are you able to join
Yeah, I'm here, guys.
Welcome. So, SRS, now that you're on here, we spoke a little bit about SMU and their new NIL deal, surely to help out with their recruiting, their establishment in Dallas, and their establishment as they get to kind of have an opportunity to be one of the more premier G5 teams during realignment. But after looking at that, it made me a little bit curious because tomorrow is going to be early signing day. And right now we've got Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, possibly vying for that top spot. But I wanted to look around a little bit, and I want to play a stupid little game with you guys, if you'll indulge me for just a moment here. I am looking right now at the 24/7 2022 composite ratings. SMU currently has a 109.17 for their rankings, putting them somewhere in that list of 1 to 150. I would like to name a handful of schools, and granted, everything's going to change tomorrow with the signing day, but I would like to name a couple of schools, and I want you all to guess, as of this very recording, is this team higher in the rankings or lower in the rankings when it comes to recruiting the day before signing day? I'm going to start naming a couple of schools. You guys ready to play?
Just to reiterate, where is SMU at again?
SMU currently has 109.17 as their score. That puts them at 82nd. Now, this is according to 24/7 on their composite. And that's what I'm going to be using off for this sheet.
Okay, I've got them. So just for everybody to make sure that they understand how this works, 24/7, it's a composite, uses other ranking services as well. But one thing to consider is that it is weighted by how many are in the class. Bigger classes do tend to give you an advantage. For instance, so looking at this, Hope at El Silo Thunder, NIU is at 81, Washington is at 83. NIU's average recruit is 80.6, SMU's is 85, and Washington's is 88.9. But because NIU has 16, SMU has 8 commits, and Washington has 6, NIU gets the bump.
Correct. And of course, because none of these guys are fully signed yet, we're going to see a bunch of hat science examples and opportunities come out in about 24 hours from now. We're going to go ahead and just take, based off of these rankings, and SRS, I need you to not cheat. I need you to get off that list, and I'm going to give you a couple of randomly assigned teams, and you just tell me if they are above or below SMU in these current rankings.
All right,
ready to play?
24/7 is hidden. Go for it.
All right. Our first team on the board, the Arizona State Sun Devils, headed up by Herm Edwards, who is guaranteed at least one more year in 2022. Are they above or below SMU in the current rankings?
I'm firm for Herm. I'm going to say they're above.
SRS says above. Bobak.
I'm
above or below SMU?
I'm going to go, just to be contrarian, I'll say lower.
They are, in fact, lower.
Oh.
They are lower by 11 points. They are down in 94th. The Fighting Herman Edwards, not nearly as high on the recruiting scale as SMU. Let's go with another one, another Power 5. The Kansas Jayhawks, above or below SMU in the current recruiting rankings?
I'm going to say above again.
I'm going to also go above on this one, only because I would believe the Jayhawks have the ability to attract people who want to play immediately, and maybe they've got some of those folks who have not quite made that final decision, those really high-end recruits that sometimes wait until the last second.
Also, they have the bump from beating Texas at home. So
that is correct. People do forget that the Kansas Jayhawks did, in fact, beat the Texas Longhorns in Austin. But that does not give them an advantage. With 8 commits, they are 88th. They are 6 points below SMU in those rankings. Now let's go on with another similar one. The Stanford Cardinal. 3-9 on the year. Still have David Shaw at the helm. They did upset Oregon, who is now headed to the Alamo Bowl after losing their coach. The Stanford Cardinal, above or below the SMU Mustangs in recruiting?
I feel like this is a trap, but I'm going to say lower.
I'm also going to say lower. I just can't see them beating SMU at this point.
Bobak is also contractually obligated to do that, so
He's
According,
joking because my alma mater is USC.
according to the 247 sports rankings that I've got in front of me right now, Stanford is 14th in recruiting rankings with 21 commits, 7 of them being blue chip recruits. They are currently ranked above stalwarts such as Clemson, Michigan State, Tennessee, Virginia Tech, and Ole Miss, and Oregon.
See, at the same time, I'm contractually obligated to say that they weren't going to be higher. I'm also contractually obligated to lose to Stanford again and again and again until the end of time. So there you go.
And here we go. We're going to go with our last one before we bring Shehan onto this show. They have one of the best mascots in all of college football. They have one of the best names in all of college football. They are your Campbell Fighting Camels. Are they above or below SMU in the current rankings for 24/7?
They're FCS, right?
Yes, they are FCS. And I'll give you a hint. They have 11 commits, 8 of them being 3 stars or higher.
They're higher. There's no way they're making the list unless, like, noticeably like this, unless something weird's going on and they actually are higher.
I have to go with that logic as well.
Your Campbell Fighting Camels are 3 ranks behind the SMU Mustangs with 11 commits, 8 of which are 3-star recruits. The Campbell Fighting Camels are, in fact, in 85th as of this signing. But of course, tomorrow is going to be a completely different day. We're going to see a bunch of new signings. These current rankings are going to be completely thrown out the window. The great race right now is between Georgia, Alabama, and Texas A&M to see who will take over that number 1 spot. Who's going to bring in the most 5 stars and most blue chip recruits? We all know that stars matter when it comes to a championship, but you can't ever beat a 5-star heart.
I just have to say, those Campbell Fighting Camels, they really should be hanging up a banner right now because they've beaten Arizona State in the recruiting rankings. I mean, that's just hang the banner. They were actually, I'm remembering now, they were non-scholarship up until about, I want to say several years ago, and then they shifted to being a scholarship football program. So that's amazing in that own right. But that is fascinating. Thank you for that, JD.
Yes, absolutely. And more than anything else, I do want to thank our guest that's about to come on. We've got him up as a speaker. He is a good dear friend of mine, one of the best up-and-coming sports writers in all of America. You can find his work at CBS Sports. He has been known in places such as Dave Campbell's Texas Football and Big 12 Diehards, a graduate of the Baylor University Bears. It's our good friend, Shehan Jeyarajah. Shehan, welcome to RFC Reddit Talk.
What's up, guys? Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on board.
Man, it's been a fun year for sure. This is my first year, for people who don't know, at CBS Sports, and I appreciate all the stuff that you guys do over at Reddit College Football. It's always it keeps the game a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. We always appreciate that. We are a very vain folk, and we always love to hear those kinds of compliments. Please, by no means, never stop giving those compliments. We always appreciate them. But more than anything else, we really, really appreciate you coming on board. We have a lot of bowl games that are coming on, and especially with your expertise, we really want to be able to dive into some of these. I mean, Friday, we've got bowl games happening. When you first look at these couple of bowl games, we got the Bahamas Bowl, where you've got a great matchup in one of the greatest settings for a bowl game. I know Bobak will be the first to say that is a dream venue to go out and cover. You've got the Cure Bowl with an incredible matchup between NIU and Coastal Carolina. You've got everything down to UTSA going after a CUSA conference championship against the Mountain West runner-ups in San Diego State. We've got a lot of fantastic games that are coming up, and we really appreciate you coming on board to talk about some of these matchups and some of the things that we can look forward to with them.
Of course, man. Come on, let's get to it.
All right. Well, first off, Bobak, I want you to come on board and kind of set a scene for the Bahamas Bowl that's going to be happening on Friday. That, of course, is going to be a game that takes off on Friday morning. I believe that is 11 o'clock local time here in the Central Time Zone. That is going to be the Middle Tennessee State Blue Raiders taking on the Toledo Rockets. Bobak, I know that this is a dream bowl for you to cover one day. Why is that?
Well, I mean, for the obvious reason of being in the Bahamas, that's easy enough to say. The team hotel is the Atlantis, that amazing hotel that's always been out there on the edge of the capital, kind of on its own island with swimming with the dolphins. It's got a casino, it's got the amazing pools. But I'm sure some of you may remember that first Bahamas Bowl. I had it on in the background, and we saw Western Kentucky and Central Michigan have just a game for the ages, where it looked like the game was going to end in just spectacular fashion on a final play that ended in, anyone who's seen it knows exactly what I'm talking about. I recommend looking up the end to that 2014 Bahamas Bowl. But again, ever since, it's been a delight. It's one of the few times you really enjoy the novelty of seeing all those players find out what bowl they're going to go play in. Because imagine that. You're going to college, to be a college athlete, that's a hard enough job. And it is a full-time job to be a college athlete in basically any level of college sports. I'm not going to just say D1, but any level. And to find out, you get to go celebrate your season in the Bahamas at the resort, enjoy yourself. I mean, it's an adventure. One of my favorite moments, somebody came on our CFB and was talking about their Bahamas Bowl experience as a fan. They were a fan of the Ohio Bobcats. And it sounded like organized chaos in the best possible way. People firing arrows outside. They had like an archery deal, and kids were just being allowed to try and fire the arrow on their own. Drunk guys just kind of meandering around the stadium. The security just sort of bemused. The whole thing just sounds like a complete and utter delight. It's what college football kind of would be like in a dream state. So I'm excited for the game, and I absolutely one day hope to be there to witness it myself. And as I recall, this is the first game where we have two repeat visitors to the Bahamas Bowl in Middle Tennessee and Toledo. But that's just my introduction to this bowl. It is my favorite G5 bowl, hands down.
I do feel like I have to jump in here and point out that that the sponsors for this game have been incredible. First, there was Popeyes for multiple years, which is, of course, great in its own right. Except for that, the Bahamas does not have a Popeyes on the island, so that just feels cruel to go and name it after Popeyes. And then for 2 years, it was sponsored by Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Remember, like there was like a town individually that sponsored the Bahamas Bowl of all bowls. I don't know why this is like a magnet for some chaos, but I mean, it's the Bahamas, right? I mean, this is like the most college football game in so many ways.
My favorite part about the guy who was there and was like live Redditing the entire experience and posting pictures and things was the part where he talks about they go up to the gate with beers in hand. They buy a bag of Bud Lights, 6 of them for $12, so $2 a beer, and they just tell them, yeah, we were already inside, and they just let the entire group of people walk in with a sack full of beer. I mean, this is the only thing that I've heard similar to this is like at NASCAR races when you could bring your own cooler.
Yeah,
that's as close as I've ever heard anything like this at a like professionally organized sporting event.
I will say, to move it to the game a little bit, it is a shock to me that Middle Tennessee is in a bowl game. Last year, I think they went like 3-9, 2-10, something like that. It looks like Rick Stockstill is going to get run out of town. And this year, you know who they beat along the way? They beat FAU by 10 points in the final game of the year. And then they beat Marshall earlier in the year as well. And like, just what a weird path to a bowl game for Middle Tennessee, a team that, again, a year ago was just a total tire fire of a program, and all of a sudden back in a bowl game competitive with everybody.
I completely agree. I honestly thought, especially when they opened, 1-4 with probably 1-3 with only the win over an FCS team, I thought this was going to be it. It seemed like the program was completely starting to lose faith in Stockstill, but here they are. I'm not sure how much longer he'll be there, but it's certainly better. I mean, because one of the wins was like UConn, so it's not exactly a big plus. But I'm amazed they made it. But I think they're probably a little more excited about making this bowl than Toledo is in finding themselves in it.
Not gonna lie, I actually did go and check earlier because I could have sworn that I had seen a news item saying that Rick Stockstill was going to announce he was going to resign at the end or retire at the end of the season, and I had to go double check him. Like, he is still the coach. He didn't actually do that, and apparently that was just a fever dream from, I don't know, 2021, I guess.
That's the kind of year it's been, just Rick Stockstill fever dreams.
I'm also really interested for Toledo in their appearance in this game because MTSU has definitely taken a huge swing to actually get back into bowl contention. But one of the wild things for Toledo for me is they started off the year, they get the win over their FCS opponent. I think it's like Norfolk State or something like that. Get blown out, or they actually had a really close game against Notre Dame, who had just gotten off that scare against FSU, and we were like, ooh, who could this be this year? But then they get blown out by Colorado State. They get another close loss to Northern Illinois. They've got an overtime loss to one of the directional Michigans, a 3-point loss to one of the other directional Michigans. But then they ended up winning their last 3 games of the year by very, very convincing fashion. I think the final scores, I mean, they scored 35 in at least all of them. I think they had 7 touchdowns in their other 2 games against Bowling Green and Akron. And now it's 7-5. Jason and Candle, I know that we say that MTSU might be a little bit more excited to be playing this game, but at this point, I'm not sure if Toledo, I think, at least with what they've shown on the field, I'm not sure that MTSU exactly has the defense to slow down what they've been able to put out on the field for these last 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, and you mentioned offensively. I mean, they've got a great running back, Bryant Kobeck, who's rushed for over 100 yards in each of their last couple of games. And you look at the line. I mean, Toledo is, of course, favored by 10.5 points. It is going to, I think, in some ways come down to that motivation factor, right? But the big thing for Toledo is also heading into 2022. Obviously, I think the hope is that they can kind of reemerge as a MAC contender. It's been a couple of years since they won the league. And it looks like maybe in that last kind of 5-game run, I mean, because even their 2 losses around them, well, I mean, even actually, heck, look at all their losses, right? 2 points to Northern Illinois, 3 points in overtime to Central Michigan, 3 points against Eastern Michigan. Like, this was a team that was really, really close to being the class of the MAC. So maybe this is kind of a final sort of deal that can help launch them into 2022 as a potential favorite.
I will just note that Toledo game against Notre Dame was the game that was relegated to whatever Peacock is. So it was an exciting game to read the score updates for. But I don't think many people outside of the really hardcore Notre Dame faithful and perhaps some Toledo fans, like those guys in the weird masks that sometimes appear, or I don't know if they still do, but they were always those mask guys that would appear at their games that had kind of a weird sort of almost like they were from Eyes Wide Shut. Anyway, those guys were paying for it, but it was really fun to watch those score updates up until Notre Dame finally broke away. But they put the scare in the Irish, which only made the rest of their season for the Rockets all the more confusing, especially following it up with the loss to Adazio's crew, which, by the way, I just still have to note it's amazing Adazio's last game was getting ejected from his final game at Colorado State. But I don't want to get too far afield.
So that all being said, going into this game, Toledo is favored by 10.5. Shehan, based off of this line, is this something that we can expect Toledo to actually go in with a double-digit victory?
Yeah, I mean, so I picked Middle Tennessee to cover. I think they're going to be real motivated for this game. I think they finished the year well, but I definitely think that it's going to be right around that line, right? I mean, it could be, it could be Toledo by 10. Just the way that they ended the year, Toledo did very impressive. And I mean, Middle Tennessee really doesn't have much to be able to stop Bryant Kobeck at running back. So I probably think that it's going to be Toledo by 7 to 10. But I mean, listen, after a few days in the islands, who knows?
Who knows? Who knows for sure? But hey, speaking of another game where you've got a 10 4-point favorite. We can move over to the Cure Bowl, which is going to be the evening game on Friday. That's going to be on Friday, December 17th, 5 p.m. Central Time on ESPN2. And that's going to be your MAC champions, Northern Illinois, going against Coastal Carolina, which somehow has been able to hang on to Jamie Chadwell in this insane coaching cycle. What's the first thing that you make out of this game, Shehan?
Well, I think that, Coastal Carolina was very, very close to obviously doing something very special for 2 years in a row. And for the way that they ended the year, I mean, obviously their quarterback being hurt played a big part in that. I still think that they're a really good team. I think that they're a top 35 to 40 type team in the country. Credit to Northern Illinois, right? They played everybody close and they ended up coming away with so many close wins. But that worries me a little, going against a team like Coastal Carolina, a team that has dominated teams over the past couple of years. And so I think that ultimately it's just hard for me to believe that Northern Illinois is going to be able to keep it close consistently. I mean, this is the best team that they played, obviously, since conference play started. I mean, you're going back to them playing like Michigan since they've played a team this good. So I just don't know whether Northern Illinois, which is their young team, is going to be able to hang. They certainly haven't played anybody who's going to prepare them for Coastal Carolina's kind of unique spread option-based offense. I think that Coastal Carolina probably wins this pretty easy, but again, it's bowl season. I'm curious to know exactly how motivated they are.
Thomas Hammock has definitely had a very strong case for having one of the best coaching turnarounds. From last year, those Huskies went winless. This year, they're now MAC champions. But 9 of their games this year ended up being played within one score. They got lucky in a lot of them with a lot of those one-score games, including everything from Georgia Tech with the 22-21 win in Atlanta, all the way down to winning at Buffalo in overtime. And then even playing against Kent State, that was one of their first games in a while where they had a clear victory with a good sizable portion, 41-23. But I think you're definitely right when you say that this is the first team since about Michigan that they've seen this quality of opponent and especially this quality of scheme. I know that with the version of the essentially triple option that Jamie Chadwell runs, this is going to be a really interesting approach for that NIU defense. What should we know about Jamie Chadwell's offense as we head into this bowl game? Maybe something that we haven't necessarily seen before or something that we haven't really known yet because his name was so hot on the coaching carousel for a long time. To me, it's a little bit of a surprise that Coastal Carolina was still able to hang on to him.
No doubt. So, I mean, for people who haven't watched a whole lot of Coastal Carolina, I mean, they basically run the option, but like with a very dynamic spread passing element. And Grayson McCall, their quarterback, I think has arguably over the past 2 years maybe been a top 3 quarterback in the country. I mean, he is so efficient. He runs the system so well. And I mean, when you watch an option team like Navy, the difference between a good Navy team and a bad Navy team is who their quarterback is that year, right? It just makes that much of a difference. And that's really what Grace McCall brings to this Coastal Carolina team. And so when he was dealing with some injuries, that's really when they started to struggle a little bit. He wasn't fully healthy for the App game when they lost. And so I think that Coastal Carolina just – they have playmakers everywhere. Isaiah Likely was a midseason All-America at tight end through CBS Sports. Like, they have a lot of playmakers. They've got a lot of guys who know their role. They have a lot of guys who have played for multiple years in this system. And so it's going to be a lot of young Northern Illinois defenders having to guess, right? And I think that when you're putting a lot of young players in positions where they have to make decisions, I like the team that's going to make them make the decisions with experienced players a little bit more.
Just a quick reminder, thank you all for joining us. This is the RCFB Talk. We are joined right now by Shehan Jeyarajah from CBS Sports. I just wanted to go ahead and give our sort of ID before we continue talking, just for those of you who've joined us in the middle of this. So right now we're talking about the Cure Bowl with Coastal Carolina versus NIU. One thing I did want to just sort of mention, I know Jamie Chadwell, we kind of talked about the fact that he has managed to stay put during this latest coaching carousel. I've always wondered how much loyalty he has because I remember he left Charleston Southern right after taking them to the NCAA tournament. He was their head coach to join the staff under Joe Moglia over at Coastal Carolina. And for those of you who've never heard Moglia, he is one of the most amazing speakers in person. I mean, the guy had the amazing background. He was, he had played football at Dartmouth, ended up going into finance, became a very successful CEO over at what is now TD Ameritrade, and kind of worked his way into deciding to be a college coach and managed his way up to the head coach of Coastal Carolina. From what I could tell, and I met him several times at Sunbelt Media Days, I think he had a hint his medical condition was probably going to eliminate him from the intensity of a college head coaching job, and maybe that's how they were able to lure Chadwell over as a head coach in waiting, although I'm pretty sure it happened quicker than anyone expected. But I've always wondered if that perhaps is keeping him somewhat more loyal to the program, because for someone who's willing to just sort of leave a head coaching job at the FCS level to take that assistant position at a G5 program, it is remarkable that he's still there after the tremendous success they've had in the past couple of years. What do you think about that, Shehan?
Yeah. So, something that's good to know is that he's primarily coached in the state of South Carolina, and he's had success, like you mentioned, at Charleston Southern, moving up to Coastal Carolina, really turning them around in a big way. I think that he knows that he doesn't need to just leave for anything. And I mean, I will say a flip side of this too, and I think that we've gone through this with the Willie Fritz, the coach at Tulane, right? Somebody who also runs kind of an unorthodox offense. That sometimes I think Power 5 programs sometimes think that they're a little too good for that in some ways. They think that it's a gimmick. It's not as much as maybe like a full option like what Jeff Monken or Ken Niumatalolo runs, but you are talking about doing something unorthodox. And to me, the most obvious job in the world for him to get offered would have been South Carolina after Will Muschamp was fired. But they really kind of decided they want to go in a heavy recruiting direction. They really want to compete from that perspective and not really be, I guess, kind of unique schematically. So I do think that his time will come at some point, but I do think that he's not just going to leave just to leave, right? I don't think he's going to leave just for a job in the American. I don't think he's going to leave for a bottom tier Power 5 job necessarily. I think he's going to wait and pick his spots because, you mentioned with Coastal Carolina, you'd imagine being the head coach at Charleston Southern and having so much success, you'd kind of understand a little bit what Coastal Carolina is, what its advantages are, what its disadvantages are. And so I think that when he does ultimately make that kind of jump, it's going to be the kind of jump that's very well thought out and has kind of very specific reasoning to it as well.
So going into this game, the Cure Bowl, who do you got? Who's your pick to take this one?
Yeah, it's hard for me to pick against Coastal Carolina. I just think that they're a better team right now. I think that, for regardless how they ended the year, I think that they're a very physically gifted team. I think that they have a few more playmakers. I think that Grayson McCall is the best player on the field. And Northern Illinois, again, just playing so many close games. I credit to them, right? I mean, they won the dang conference, but I think that when you do play against a better opponent like Coastal Carolina, some of those issues sometimes turn up. You're not going to be able to maybe take advantage of some of these inefficiencies that maybe you can against MAC opponents. I think that Coastal Carolina is just a head and shoulders above of kind of the opponents that Northern Illinois has played to this point. And again, I mean, you really do have to go all the way back to when they played against Michigan to find a team that's comparably talented. Obviously, Michigan is more talented, but just in terms of the sort of talent gap that you're maybe looking at with Northern Illinois versus Coastal. So it's a big line. I mean, 10.5 is winning by 2 touchdowns, basically. But I think that they definitely have the firepower to be able to do it.
Yeah, I do remember early in the season, after that loss to Wyoming at home, the NIU fans were starting to get quite impatient with Hammock. But patience ended up paying off, at least for the rest of the season. I mean, I don't think anyone expected them to necessarily beat Michigan, although they did, of course, at the time, seemingly upset Georgia Tech, and then Georgia Tech ended up being the program that we now know they were this season. But Michigan, I mean, obviously much stronger team than was expected in week 3, but over the course of the season, it is really hard to to throw much shade at what Hammock did to turn around the Huskies. But yeah, I agree. I'm totally with you. I can't possibly see. I mean, I could see them pulling an upset, but I think this Coastal team is just simply too strong heading into this game.
Shehan, I think you had said it best. Grayson McCall is going to be the best player on this field. And once you've got him handling the ball and being able to run the offense that Jamie Chadwell runs, it's really hard to pick against that, no matter how good your MAC champion is going to be for that year. I, too, am going to be in the same boat for the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers. But as we've mentioned, the best guys on the field. I know that one of the next games that's going to be coming up is going to be on Saturday, December 18th. Shehan, I know that you two are a big believer in the gospel of Bailey Zappi with the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. They're going up against a 10-win Appalachian State team that actually ended up beating Coastal Carolina earlier this year. Looking at this game, App State is a 2.5-point favorite. This game's going to be on Saturday at 11 a.m. Central, or 10 a.m. Central, on ESPN. What do you make of Bailey Zappi going up against App State?
Man, this is going to be, I think, one of the better games of bowl season. I mean, Western Kentucky, for people who don't know, Bailey Zappi, their quarterback, leads the nation in passing, leads the nation in touchdowns. Last year, and for the 3 years before that, he was the starting quarterback at Houston Baptist. That was his only offer coming out of high school. Houston Baptist, a very, very small school in the Southland at the time. And he went and played against Power 5 opponents in non-conference play and lit them up. Like my first time actually knowing about Bailey Zappi. I mean, I worked for Dave Campbell's Sex Football, so I was very aware of football in the state. But it was when they went and played against UTEP in the first game of, I believe, Dana Diddle's second season, and he just went crazy. Like they nearly pulled the upset, and everybody in El Paso thought that the sky was falling. It ended up Bailey Zappi's just a really, really good player. So he moves on to Western Kentucky, ends up being one of the best quarterbacks in the country this year. The flip side, right? I mean, because with Western Kentucky, you've got a team that's very dynamic in the passing game. Though I will mention, likely their offensive coordinator, Zach Kitley, will not be in the building after taking the offensive coordinator job at Texas Tech. But on the other side, in App State, you've got a team that is one of the most physical running teams in the country. Like they have such unique schemes. You know, one thing that I heard about when Garrett Riley, the former offensive coordinator at App State, took the offensive coordinator job at SMU was that Sonny Dykes really wanted to know about some of these App State run concepts. They do things in a really interesting way. They run a lot of counter. They run a lot of misdirection and stuff like that. But they're also just physically really, really good. And so it's going to be a great game. I mean, it's a clash of styles in so many ways with a dynamic passing game playing against a dynamic rushing game. It should be a lot of fun.
It definitely is going to be really interesting to see Bailey Zappi play without Zach Kitley's offensive coordination skills, because again, more than likely he will be at Texas Tech instead of coaching in this game. But Appalachian State, absolutely nothing to slouch at. They were able to contain that Jamie Chadwell offense earlier this year. They gave the then undefeated Coastal Carolina team their first loss of the year. When you look at that defense, what is the opportunity that they have to make a statement in this game against a player like Bailey Zappi?
Yeah, I mean, this is what it's all about, right? I mean, these are the kinds of matchups that you hope when you put together bowl games. And so I think that for App State, I mean, you look at their performances in those last couple of weeks of the season, allowing only 3 points to Georgia Southern, only 7 points to Troy, only 7 points to South Alabama, 14 to Arkansas State. I mean, they've shut everybody down, right? They even beat Coastal Carolina and that great, Grayson McCall as well. So I think that they have a chance to really muck up this game in a lot of ways. And if there's one thing that you say about Western Kentucky is that they are very dependent on the pass. They have some great receivers. Jared Stearns was an All-American receiver, but if you can kind of muck the game up, if you can make them very one-dimensional, I think it's very hard to play against a team like Appalachian State because they're not going to back down, right? I mean, they can wear you down. They can wear your offensive line down. They can wear your quarterback down. They can wear your running game down. And I think that's going to be a big key for them is if they can get Western Kentucky off the field quickly, it's just going to be, grinding it out. It's going to be running them over. And I think the Appalachian State is, kind of very well positioned to do that.
So as we all fight to hit the unmute button, try to figure out who our next bowl game is going to be. I know that we've got another huge opportunity with another game on the other side of the country. That's going to be the Albuquerque Bowl. That's going to be Fresno State and UTEP. UTEP, of course, a team I don't think anybody saw bowling at the start of the year. They're now 7-5, going up against a 9-3 Fresno State team that just lost their head coach to Washington. Or excuse me, this is the New Mexico, not the Albuquerque Bowl. It's being played in Albuquerque, but it is the New Mexico Bowl that UTEP and Fresno State are playing in. That's going to be the afternoon game on ESPN. Fresno State favored by 11.5. Again, Shehan, I know that you're very familiar with the challenges that UTEP has faced. How surprised are you at this opportunity that they have in this bowl game, which is the first bowl game they've had in quite a while?
Yeah, first bowl game since I believe 2005, and they haven't won a bowl game since 1967. So this is not something that happens very often at UTEP. The big question for this game, though, is going to be around Fresno State. Is Jake Haener playing in this game? Because he had originally put his name into the transfer portal, kind of quietly pulled it out. It hasn't been clarified at this point whether he plans to travel with the team to play. Now, Jake Haener, former Washington transfer, put together one of the better seasons in college football this year by a group of 5 player. There were rumors that he might transfer to Washington with his former head coach, Kalen DeBoer, who, by the way, also will not coach in this game. So I think that this really becomes a motivation type question, right? It's that kind of situation. And, for UTEP, everything is just out there, right? Like everything's on the line. You haven't done this in 50 years. It doesn't matter who it's against. It doesn't matter who, any of this sort of stuff. This is a big moment for UTEP. And I think that's kind of my question about Fresno State is it going to mean the same sort of thing for them? They're favored by 11.5 points, and they are the better team, right? I mean, I think that we saw UTEP play against Boise State earlier in the year, and they could not hang physically against Boise State. And that might happen, I think, in this game as well against Fresno State. But they're going to be prepared for this game. They're going to have this game circled. They're really going to, I think, be motivated to come out and put on a good performance. The other thing, too, of course, being in Albuquerque, it's only a couple hours away from El Paso. So I do imagine that a lot of people will be driving out. If you haven't watched UTEP this year, especially after the early season run, they are a really physical defense, and they love explosive plays. Jacob Cowing, their receiver, is a potential NFL type player, seriously, on Sundays. And so they really like to go deep with him. They've got a quarterback in Gavin Hardison who can chuck it like nobody's business. And so they're going to have to hit on some big plays to really make this a game, but it certainly is possible.
I admit I was a little let down by UTEP earlier this season. I was really hoping they were going to beat FAU kind of with one loss heading to that hosting of UTSA and be that dark horse candidate for game day for an undefeated UTSA at a one-loss UTEP. And it just didn't happen. FAU got the best of them in a close game. It was closer than it wasn't like a blowout or anything, but that I was saddened. I really wanted to see the Miners host game day in the Sun Bowl with that really wild campus they have with all the Bhutanese architecture. Based on the Kingdom of Bhutan and in Nepal, probably not in Nepal, but in the Himalayas, which is really, really awesome. But they just kind of slid in the end. And after that incredible opening to their season. But that's all I wanted to say about that. I've been still a little bit saddened by that. I really was hoping they were going to be able to host game day earlier.
I will mention a quick correction. TK Maxwell in the reply says that Zach Kittley will coach in the bowl game. So that is huge for them, I think, against Appalachian State to have Zach Kittley for that game.
Oh, yes, absolutely. If he has the availability to have that one final game with Bailey Zappi, that's going to be a game changer for the Western Kentucky squad to be able to go out and play a full, complete game. And especially, I know you're going to know this substantially more than I do when it comes to the motivation of players going into bowl practices and playing for something significant. But knowing that this is going to be a one final ride, whether that's going to be these guys with Fresno State, whether that's going to be with these seniors that are going out and knowing that this is going to be their final game, whether it's going to be Bailey Zappi knowing this is the last time he's out and playing with his offensive coordinator before he takes the Texas Tech job. What exactly does that mean for motivation for these players heading into these practices and ultimately these bowl games as well?
Sorry, can you repeat what you finished up with? You cut
out. Again, just what does that change for the motivation for those guys, knowing that this is going to be their last time together on a last final ride, whether that's going to be Kitley doing one last coaching round with Bailey Zappi or any of these seniors heading into a final game that they're going to play together, or UTEP playing for their first bowl win in what has been just about forever. How much does that motivation, do you think, plays into these type of practices and then these bowl games that they actually end up playing in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge, right? I mean, I think that for teams that, that going to the New Mexico Bowl is a huge deal, right? Like, I think that does make a difference because, you're talking about a staff that's a little more engaged, whereas I think that there are some staffs that are going to treat this just like an exhibition, right? I mean, that's just part of the game. And, you see, for example, in some of the major bowl games, right, for teams that just missed out on the college football playoff, you see players opt out and not play in the bowl game. I think that it's obvious, right, that not every player views this opportunity the same. And that's how it should be, right? I mean, it's not the same game for every single team. So I do think that there is a legitimate sort of opportunity for teams that are all in and are really motivated, and for a coordinator like Zach Kitley to be there, and for Bailey Zappi, this is an opportunity for him to increase his NFL draft stock, and for Jared Stearns, it's a chance for him to potentially put his name into the NFL draft conversation, and same with Jacob Cowing, et cetera. I mean, this is the biggest stage that a lot of these kids are going to ever play on, right? I mean, UTEP, you mentioned, I would have loved for them to have the opportunity to have college game day when they played against UTSA, but this is one of the biggest showcases that they're ever going to get, playing on, national television, on ESPN, in a spot where every one of their family and friends are able to watch this game on a Saturday afternoon. I think that sort of thing does matter, especially when it's not something that's necessarily a guarantee, like with some other programs.
Shehan, I have a question for you real quick. You might know this. So is it the PUBG Mobile New Mexico Bowl, or is this going to be the Players Unknown Battlegrounds Mobile New Mexico Bowl?
I do not know that.
This is one of my favorite bowl game names. This is right up there with Battletoads or Battle Frog or whatever the Fiesta Bowl had for that one and done.
Yeah, man, it's so funny to always go around and see these random names of bowl games and stuff like that. I mean, it's one of actually, funny story. So my wife and I, we went during sort of the beginning of COVID and drove up to Colorado to just, go kind of hang out in the mountains and stuff. And on the way, we ran into a Beef O'Brady's, which I just I'd never seen one before. And I'm like, we have to stop and take a picture here because I've never seen a Beef O'Brady's in my life. That's the college football bowl game. So, I mean, I figured that I always love when we have an opportunity to just pull something else completely weird into the picture.
With going back to Fresno State, Jeff Tedford's returning. He last coached in 2019. With the COVID rules, everybody getting extra eligibility. Obviously, a lot of the players on the team this year, he was probably heavily involved in recruiting. But Lee Marks is going to be the interim head coach for the Bulldogs. Although Tedford has been back to the facilities already. He showed up at a Fresno State basketball game the other night. Jake Hayner referenced the relationship he had with Tedford as a reason for why he's coming back, and took himself back out of the portal. And it seems like the Fresno media kind of assumed that that's a heartfelt decision on his part, that, when he found out more about what was going to happen with the coaching changes, what was going to happen with Washington, that he really did have a change of heart and decided to come back. What impact do you think that's going to have on Fresno State's performance for having Lee Marks as their head coach as an interim for the bowl game, but also having Tedford already involved but not actually calling the game?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that if players know that there's going to be some clarity on, I guess, who's going to be coaching them long term, I think that can help. And I mean assistants more than just a head coach there. But I think that having somebody in the building who is going to be a part of their future, and the other part of it too, again, like you mentioned, Jeff Tedford not going to be coaching the bowl game, but I think that if he's around a little bit to kind of install some stuff in practice, if he's there to kind of help shape their future a little bit, right? I think that stuff like that can matter, just because I think it does tell players and tell a program that that this is something that we're taking seriously. We're putting work into this.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Appreciate the insight on that. Looking ahead at the rest of the slate we have, December 18th is going to be a very busy day. How about the greatest or worst, depending on how you think about it, New Year's 6 runner-up bowl, the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana. Lovely, lovely Shreveport, between UAB and BYU. Is this going to be one of the biggest mismatches that we're going to see this bowl season?
Man, if you're a BYU fan, you just have to be so thrilled that you're going to the Big 12 just for the fact that BYU has the most bizarre bowl selection process imaginable. I mean, this is like the bowl game that people in the SEC are like, please don't make me go there, right? And for BYU to finish 10-2, have one of their best seasons in recent memory, and to end up in the Independence Bowl, I mean, it kind of sucks. And the thing is too, right? Like I don't understand why BYU couldn't have ended up in a position where they're at least playing UTSA, right? I mean, UAB was the Conference USA West runner-up. They're a really good team. I mean, they really are. But UTSA was the team that won that conference. They were the class of that conference, and it's not like there was something that forced BYU to be in this bowl game or forced UTSA to not be in this bowl game. So I think that it is a little bit of a disappointment to play against a just pretty good UAB team after having the season that you had. So I assume that people at BYU are thrilled at the opportunity to hopefully hopefully play in some better bowl games heading forward.
Well, I think one of the chief reasons that we saw. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, sorry. Go right ahead, JD.
Well, I was about to just crack a joke of, I think the reason that UAB ultimately got into the Independence Bowl ahead of UTSA is they have that quality loss of a 56-7 loss to Georgia. So they've got the quality loss that UTSA might not necessarily have. But Bill Clark has been able to prove over and over and over again that UAB has been able to overachieve based on everything that has gone through that program since they were shut down and then brought back to life. And he's turned them into a consistent winner. What exactly do they bring to the table as a challenge to BYU in this game?
Yeah, I mean, they are just so well coached. They're physical, and they've gotten just consistent play across the field. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that in a lot of ways. They've done a good job of building up depth. They're probably one of the most physically gifted teams in Conference USA every year, just from a developmental perspective. I think that they really well utilize being in the state of Alabama, just in terms of kind of, in some ways, taking that second tier of athlete that the SEC doesn't take in a lot of ways. And so you're talking about a team that has great line play. You're talking about a team that runs the ball at a high level. The difference between good UAB teams and great UAB teams has been at quarterback. And, Dylan Hopkins was fine for them this year, and I think that him being fine and not necessarily exceptional is part of why they finished 8-4 and didn't especially compete for the conference. But they are going to be a team that's going to be able to hang, I think, with BYU. I just think that BYU is just better at football.
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's a program that's been well established for longer, with longer success, and they've been able to show, even especially this season, BYU has had an incredible season. And I think, again, one of the travesties of ending up in the Independence Bowl this year, BYU went undefeated against the Pac-12, including their in-state rival in Utah, yet Utah gets to go to the Rose Bowl, and BYU gets to go to Shreveport. It's one of those ridiculous things with BYU's ties that I think is an unfortunate understatement when it comes to BYU's hopes, especially after the kind of season that they've had this year. But hopefully, as they move into the Big 12, they'll have the opportunity to get a couple of better bowl ties and some better opportunities. And especially for a program like that, I hope that we see a great game with them and UAB. But more than anything else, I do hope that we get to see a good ending for BYU, especially with the type of season that they've had with the results that they have had. Now, Shehan, I know that I promised you 1 hour max time, and I do have a couple of games that I do want to be able to speak with you on. I know that you are also a huge believer in them as well. Jeff Traylor and his gang in Meep Neep Nation, they got spurned against the opportunity to play BYU in a bowl game, but they're going to be playing the Mountain West runner-ups against the punt god himself in Frisco, Texas for the Tropical Smoothie Bowl. What kind of expectations should we have for this game between the Aztecs and the Roadrunners?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a great game. The funny thing, right, is that I think it might have been Alex Kirshner over at Split Zone Duo who kind of crowned San Diego State as like Mountain West Iowa, and that's basically what they are. I mean, they are a physical defensive team. They freaking love punting the ball in so many ways. And so I think that that's going to be a great challenge for this UTSA offense that kind of sputtered in the last couple of weeks of the season. I mean, they didn't put together some of their better performances against UAB. They obviously had the loss to North Texas, but they did come back and obviously have a good performance against Western Kentucky in the bowl game. So I'll be curious to see. I mean, so the big challenge, I think, is going to be for Frank Harris, UTSA's quarterback. Can he kind of keep the ball moving, right? Because Sincere McCormick's a known commodity at running back. Zachary Franklin is a known commodity at receiver. It's going to be, how does he deal with the pressure? How does he deal with some of the more exotic schemes that San Diego State will run at you because they do have a great defensive staff? And on the other side, I mean, UTSA's defense kind of got lost in the shuffle there because of how good the offense was in a lot of ways. Outside of that game, of course, against North Texas, can they play discipline? Can they compete with the San Diego State offensive line? It's going to be a great challenge for them, and I think that this could be one of the more fun games of bowl season as well.
For those of us who didn't see that North Texas game, what exactly happened to UTSA? Because I think a lot of people saw that score develop over the course of the day and were just, what happened here?
I think if you asked every single person in that building as well, they'd ask what happened here. I mean, it was, I think in a lot of ways, it's just, I think that sometimes you just have such an emotional moment, which UTSA the week before, they win on that pass as time expires, right? It's such an emotional moment. It's UTSA's first trophy ever. They win the Conference USA West Division and clinch their spot in the Conference USA title game. I think in some ways it just could never match up to that, right? I mean, the big thing that you point to in terms of what North Texas was able to do is they ran the ball all over them. UTSA really struggled in their run fits. They struggled to kind of be consistent in assignments. And that's not just on the defensive side of the ball. It's also on offense where they really struggled to throw the ball as well. So I think that sometimes I think football is just as easy as, hey, then you had, 85 kids who were really excited and worn out from having celebrated from a week before, and sometimes it's just mentally hard to get up for that final game, especially against a team in North Texas that, one, is a rival, right, who really wants to beat you, and two, when you kind of feel like 12-0 is in the bag in a lot of ways. So I think that more than anything else is just that I don't think that there's like one football thing that you can point to for why that happened, because there's not really a football thing that makes sense.
I think another similar thing in football things that don't make sense. Jeff Traylor, he was a hot commodity for the Texas Tech job, the TCU job, but then he settled in for a 10-year deal at UTSA. Can you share a little bit on why that decision was made, especially as he heads into a big bowl game like this? I believe it's for UTSA. It's their second bowl game. They played in that Gildan, New Mexico Bowl a couple years ago. But for Jeff Traylor to be that big of a commodity for Power 5 jobs, but choosing to stay at UTSA, what does he see in San Antonio as a long-term future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think that a I'll go back to before the 2021 season. Every year in Texas, they have this huge event called Coaching School, right, where they bring all the high school coaches together, and they have a panel with all 12 FBS coaches from the state of Texas up on one stage. And Jeff Traylor made a comment where he was basically like, "Man, like, it's great, but I envy you guys. I don't know if I'd be up here if not for the big paycheck. You guys have the real good job." So, not to say that I think Jeff Traylor regrets being a college football coach, but I think in a lot of ways he's very much kept his high schoolness, right? And one thing that people need to know about him is that he went to Gilmer, his alma mater, which is a 4A school. And he built it up into a power, won 3 state championships. He never left for a bigger school. He didn't try to move up to 6A, see if he could do that. He was happy to kind of build something on his own. And I think in a lot of ways, UTSA is that kind of program. They're going to be moving up to the American. If we get playoff expansion, it's not like it's impossible that the American ends up winning that 6th spot a lot of the time. I think that he feels like he has unfinished business at UTSA and that he can continue to move that program forward. And the other side of that, too, is that I think that Jeff Traylor basically said, can you make the money competitive, right? You don't have to outpay Power 5 jobs by any means, but can you make it competitive enough that I can stay, that I'm not turning down a tenfold raise in order to stay here? And looking at the numbers, he's going to be making 2.8 a year at UTSA. Texas Tech paid Matt Wells $3 last year, right? So it was competitive. I think that it's just a situation that makes so much sense for everybody. And I think for UTSA, there's more excitement in the San Antonio community about UTSA football than there's ever been. And this is really what they wanted when they started football 10 years ago. And credit to them for paying to keep him in place.
There's a lot of excitement in San Antonio for what the UTSA Roadrunners are building, and especially with Jeff Traylor committing to 10 years. I've seen what football can look like in the Alamo Dome when they're loud, when they're animated, when they're excited to see a quality football product on the field. And I think it's going to be something, especially with that long-term commitment, we're going to see a lot of that going forward in San Antonio. And I know in a similar football crazy environment, I know that down in Tampa, Florida, we're going to see 2 very passionate fan bases go at each other in the Gasparilla Bowl. Unfortunately, I cannot believe that Bad Boy Mowers let their sponsorship slide ahead of
Traitors.
UCF and Florida. If anything else, we need to have an emergency authorization to put the Bad Boy Mowers sponsorship back in immediately. I want to see Gus Malzahn riding around on one of those giant tractors when they go through the hay bale maze course in one of the pre-games. But UCF and Florida, this is a feud that has been going on without being on the gridiron for several years now, back when Danny White refused to play them in a 2-on-1 schedule, when you had all the sniping back and forth, when UCF was rising to power. Shehan, what do you see immediately in this game on what we're going to see with this giant sold-out crowd, which I believe is the first time the Gasparilla Bowl has actually sold out in advance?
Yeah, this is the fight for Florida, right? UCF has been talking so much over the years, and for good reason, right? For several of the past couple of years, UCF has been as good a team as Florida. And now, heading into this game, of course, this is a decent season for UCF. They finish 8-4. Florida kind of backs into a bowl game at 6-6. You talk about motivation for this game. I think that there's so much motivation by UCF to shut up people who kind of said that they don't belong, right? That say that they don't belong, competing against SEC teams, that they shouldn't hold themselves as a power conference team. And of course, UCF's going to join the Big 12, and that's going to kind of solve some of that. But I still think that there's going to be a lot of motivation for UCF to come out against Florida. And for Florida, look, I think for an SEC team, there's always going to be a target on your back, regardless of who you're playing, if it's playing somebody out of conference. And for the team kind of down the road in Orlando to be talking this much and to have claimed a national championship back in 2017 and say all this sort of stuff, I think it's going to be a really hating bowl. And I think that that's all you can really ask for from bowl season.
It definitely will be, for sure. And it's going to be one of the ones that I've got circled as a favorite game to watch in this bowl season. And it's going to be right up there with one of my favorite traditions of the holiday season, which is to slip out before midnight church service to make sure that I can see the final score of the Hawaii game to see whether Hawaii has covered this year. This year, they got their exemption with the extra one-off bowl game to allow them to play against Memphis in the Hawaii Bowl. Shehan, I know we've got you for only a very, very short time longer, but with Memphis going down to Hawaii, Hawaii's had a bunch of players transfer out. Their starting quarterback is now at San Jose State. Day Hunter has their leading rusher has now transferred over to Liberty. Memphis has had its up and downs all season long. What are we going to be seeing on Christmas Eve in the new TC Ching Athletics Complex over in Manoa?
Yeah, it's brutal for Hawaii right now. I mean, obviously there was that reporting that came out, I believe from San Francisco Gate, just kind of getting into the stuff that's happening right now with Todd Graham at Hawaii. And just, I mean, you hear quotes like, we're starting to hate football because of Todd Graham and stuff like that. It just feels like morale is so low right now in Hawaii. And that sucks. I mean, because Hawaii is one of these great programs, right? That when they have a lot of, they're just fun to watch. They do things their own way. Obviously, with the run and shoot offense, they were a must watch for so many years. And it just doesn't feel like it's going to be that kind of game, right? I mean, they did finish the season decently. They beat Colorado State, and then they kind of crushed Wyoming to win their sixth game and be able to make a bowl game. But I just think that Memphis heading into this game, Memphis didn't have a great year either. I think that there's more motivation for them to try to build some momentum heading into 2022. I mean, they've got a freshman quarterback from the state of Texas, Seth Hennigan, who has played really well for stretches this year. And I think that they're going to be real focused on trying to put him in positive situations. And so I don't know. I have a hard time believing that Hawaii is going to get up enough for this game to really be able to compete with Memphis.
I have to say, I mean, before he kind of tanked his reputation over at Wazoo, I remember what Rolovich was like at Hawaii because I used to do media days at the Mountain West, and he really seemed to get what it took to make Hawaii a fun place for players to be. As he said, I mean, the moment Hawaii isn't fun, you find yourself isolated on an island far, far, far away from everyone you knew, unless you're from there. So I think I think it's very striking to see how bad things have gotten. I was shocked by that report, as I'm sure you were as well.
Yeah, no question about it. And I mean, it's just, I think that if you are the coach at Hawaii, right? I mean, Hawaii doesn't tend to be a job that is much of a stepping stone, right? I mean, because most people, for legitimate reasons, don't watch the games as much because they're so late at night, because players have to go from far out. Like, it's a tough job, and it just feels like the bare minimum, like you said, is for them to be fun. And I think that Nick Rolovich got it. I think June Jones got it. And so I think for Todd Graham to say some of the things he's alleged to have said to players, and also for him to basically be saying, like, I'm using you guys to get the next job, I think it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Hawaii job is in any year, but especially in the year 2021.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much, Shehan. We always appreciate the opportunity to interact with you. You've always been a very good person with us for all the years we've had our CFB. I know JD is thrilled you were willing to come and talk with us because you two have been friends for ages. Is that right?
Yeah. Fun fact: he was so I went to Baylor. He went to some school up north called TCU, and so we became friends back in the day. He was kind of on the journalism track as well, a couple years ahead of me, and it's been cool to watch JD kind of do his own thing. And so it's always fun to have those friendships.
Absolutely. And again, Shehan, we really appreciate your time in coming on here. Have loved reading your stuff at CBS. Have loved reading all of your stuff throughout the years, whether that's been at Dave Campbell's Texas Football or back even in the day under Cox Media with Big 12 Diehards, which was, in my opinion, one of the best options to write about Big 12 football while it existed, a superstar set of really talented writers who were part of that conglomerate. But it's incredible to see the way that you've been able to be an up and rising voice in college football media. And we really appreciate you using your voice here with us today. We wish you the absolute best, an absolutely wonderful holiday season, and a joyful amount of college football bowl games to watch and ride on this year.
Of course, yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me on, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yes, please. Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, again, just to let you know what you're listening into, this is our CFB Talk. We are the team that runs RCFB, Reddit's college football community. And we've been doing some of these talks on Reddit's native app. We decided to give a talk on Twitter Spaces, which is today. So we are kind of having a little bit of fun, doing a quick, shakedown as we go along. But we'd love to start taking your calls, which is something that we really enjoyed doing when we were in the Reddit app. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Let's see here. I see one hand up. Again, be patient with us. We are learning this as much as you are. So Ben S., feel free to unmute. We'd love to hear from you.
Recognize this voice. Yes, that's right.
Hey, TJ.
Yes, that's right. Now you have a face and a name. I don't know what to call that, but it's a thing. Yeah. So how have things been for me? Pretty good. With this being the first weekend of the bowl season, it brings to us the great amazingness that is the random bowl game that was way better than you expected. Every year we seem to find this. It's that game between two teams where it's like, wait, how was that really good? That was shockingly good. Like, nobody had it on their radar, and it was just, like, and it's basically that game that, so basically the question that I have, and this is for everyone here, is what bowl game, were you just, hey, I'm going to randomly throw this on, that was like, whoa, that was surprisingly good. One of the ones.
Oh, well, I can jump right
Oh,
in
yes,
here because
please.
for me, and I mentioned it right at the beginning of talking about the Bahamas Bowl, but that opening Bahamas Bowl was insane. If anyone can go back and watch, again, it's one thing to point to one of the classics because I watched on TV live when the Boise State upset Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. That was incredible. But to go back and watch that original Bahamas Bowl when you had no idea what was going on, it was just a game you knew that was going on in some exotic location. The stadium didn't look entirely full. You had two teams that were just thrilled to be there. You had Western Kentucky and Central Michigan, two teams you may not have been that familiar with. But then you had a 49-42 game with 1 second left on the clock. And then you just had an incredible series. You had a lateral. You had another lateral. They get the touchdown. They pull within a point. And then Central Michigan decides to go for the win with the 2-point conversion. And it fails.
And this is them trying to come back. Not only that, but this was them trying to come back from down, like, I think 49-14 at one point. Like, they were down an insane amount.
It was an insane game, and it was incredible. And it was one of those games that took place in the middle of the day on a weekday. And so the only way you even knew what was happening was just by looking at the time. I think most people found out about it via Twitter because every reporter who was at home just sort of watching it on TV was just kind of like, did that just happen? I remember looking at my phone, looking at Twitter, and just watching all the reactions that were erupting live after that game. And I'm sure plenty of people at work just wondering what they had missed. So if we're talking about games you ran, and okay, one more. The Miami Beach Brawl or the Miami Beach Bowl brawl between, I think it was BYU and Memphis.
It was BYU and Memphis. I watched that. Actually, I hadn't seen that live, but somebody had made a list of random favorite bowl games, and that was on there. And I'm like, I have never heard of this. They are trying to kill each other out here.
Oh, I had that game on in the background as I was doing some work, and then you just hear what's going on the TV. Oh, rest in peace, Vine. You were delightful. But Vine, honestly, I just turned around and started recording clips after clips and tweeting them. And I remember those were the Vines where RCFB hit 100 million loops on Vine. based entirely on those fights that were taking place on the field because they were just insane. And again, it was a midday bowl on a weekday. No one was watching it, but everyone wanted to see what happened. And that is one of the most violent fights ever recorded in a football game. And it was just bonkers.
Yeah.
SRS,
I
I
never
know
really
you
got to
wanted
say
add
which
one to
one
this.
for me, by the way. For me, it was the First Responders Bowl. I think it was a couple years ago, which was the game that, if you might remember, it ended on an untimed down field goal. This had to be a couple years back. I'm going to double check this. I think it was the First Responders Bowl, but it was I think it was final play of the game. There was a penalty, and then it's set up in field goal range. I think it was Western Kentucky was involved in it, and they got a chance to kick a field goal and win the game. And it was wait, what the heck just happened here? I was coming here for something completely different. And then it was Western Kentucky, Western Michigan, 2019. So on the final play of the game, Western Kentucky got an extra untimed down and kicked the game-winning field goal. So yeah, that was.
I know you wanted to add something too.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great question to lead off this this Q&A session here from the audience. I would say that mine would be the 2015 Russell Athletics Bowl, which is now the Cheez-It Bowl. That was between North Carolina and Baylor, and that just turned into the most obscene and weirdest boat race ever. It finished up, it was 49-38 Baylor, but they put up 756 yards of offense. There were 1,200, almost 1,300 total yards between the two teams. And the craziest part about it is Baylor put up 645 rushing yards, which is not what most of us associated with those high-flying offenses of the Art Briles era at Baylor did. That they were more pass-happy, but they just ran the ball like crazy. It was just obscene what happened. Johnny Jefferson rushed for almost 300 yards, 13 per carry. It's just, how does a Power 5 team allow that to happen? You kind of expect something like that when you have a P5 versus a weak G5, or maybe probably even an FCS team if they want to let somebody run that much, where you just gash and gash and gash the opposing defense to the tune of big rushing yards. But that was one where there was another a big high-scoring bowl game with, I think, when Griffin was there. But the 2015 Russell Athletics Bowl was the one for me because those numbers shouldn't happen. But it's the great thing about bowl season is that we get to see these weird, crazy games between teams that normally don't play, and the coaches kind of just let loose and pull out whatever's in the playbook that they didn't get a chance to run very much that season, and just have some fun. And Baylor won the game, but the audience, I think, was the real winner there for getting to see just that kind of ludicrous display. But thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben, for the question. We got a few more ahead of in the list as well, so we're going to move on and see what else everybody else wants to talk about tonight. But we appreciate you making the move with us from Reddit to Twitter.
Thanks again, Ben. We appreciate it. So yeah, before we, as I kind of line up the next caller, I just wanted to say a real quick shout out to the LA Bowl. I'm kind of interested to see this one because it's a even though it's not a marquee bowl, the LA Bowl is being held in SoFi Stadium, the brand new stadium for the NFL in Los Angeles. It's going to be hosting the national championship, I believe, next year, and it's got the Jimmy Kimmel's LA Bowl between Utah State and Oregon State. I am really excited to see this game. I wish we had a chance to ask Shehan about it, but I know his time was limited. The Utah State Aggies under Blake Anderson have really impressed. I mean, they lost a few. They lost to, obviously, BYU, but BYU was bonkers this year. They lost but I mean, they at the same time, I mean, Blake Anderson coming from Arkansas State has really turned around the Aggies, and Oregon State, they're good. They're decent enough Pac-12 team. I will say, returning to Los Angeles, somewhat triumphant. I know they lost the Civil War, which I know they don't call it the Civil War anymore, but that was an exciting Civil War. We saw uncivil hands appear when the two teams got into a bit of a fight there between Oregon and Oregon State. But I'm saying it's a triumphant return for the Beavers because they beat USC in the Coliseum, and I know this USC team was pretty bad, but this is the first time Oregon State had beat USC in the Coliseum since 1960. Okay, that's how big of a deal it was. That's also how bad Clay Helton's USC Trojans were, but we'll set that aside. So I just want to say, what do you guys, JD, SRS, what do you guys think of this LA Bowl that's coming up? Because that's one of the games that's coming up this Saturday.
It's one of those games where when I recognize that the state of bowl sponsorship is in absolute disarray these days, when you've got everything from COVID-19 backing down people from their marketing dollars to people just deciding that there isn't as much value in the naming of a bowl. But it's one of those things that I hear the LA Bowl, and then I remember Jimmy Kimmel is technically the sponsor for this game. And it just makes me think, no, this isn't a real bowl game. There's no way that there's anybody actually playing in a game called the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl. And I recognize that Oregon State is going to be there having a fantastic display in this game, and they're going to have a fantastic opponent when they play in this game. But it's so difficult for me to think about an LA Bowl and not have the immediate disassociation of, this is the Jimmy Kimmel Bowl. It's just a mind-boggling thing for me whenever I think about that because I literally can't get the sponsor out of my head.
I'm just here to advocate for Taco Bell taking over the sponsorship and referring to it as the La Bowl, como se dice bowl in Espanol.
Okay. I just have to say one more quick question. Who do you all think is going to take this one? I'm a little hot on the Utah State Aggies. They defeated and upset the San Diego State Aztecs just down the street in Carson, because some of you may know that San Diego State is basically homeless for the next couple of seasons, and they've been forced to play hours north not even in Orange County, in LA County, in Carson. So they were able to knock off the Aztecs to head into this game. So they do have quite a bit of momentum in their direction as the Mountain West champions. But I'm thinking they could take out Oregon State. What do you two think?
I'm a huge believer in Jonathan Smith and the program that he is building at Oregon State, but I am a rapid believer in what Blake Anderson is doing at Utah State. We know that he took that job to get a fresh change after his wife had passed away while he was at the Arkansas State job out in Arkansas. But he turned them around in what was supposed to be a rebuilding year after a really bad 2020 with this Utah State team, turned them around into a 10-game winner. It is really hard for me to pick against the Aggies in this one.
Utah State's coming off of an upset win in the conference championship game. Oregon State fired their defensive coordinator last month. So I'm going to go with the Aggies.
All right. Well, let's see. We want to keep people talking, so let's go into the queue. Noah, I'm going to go ahead and add you as a speaker. Thank you for your patience. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey, you guys. So it seems like every single day you see a new player in the transfer portal, and I'm in the camp that, if you think you have the opportunity to better yourself at a different school, you should definitely take it. But I'm worrying about the impact on the mid-majors, because now it seems like a mid-major is almost like an elevated JUCO, which maybe it always has been that way, but a quarterback for South Alabama could have a really good year, and now all of a sudden he's taking over a Power 5 job. But on the other hand, you've got players like a Calzada, and he might end up at or go down to a mid-major. So, maybe they're benefiting from it also. I was seeing what what you guys think the impact on mid majors is for the how active the transfer portal is.
I think that there's a lot of hope still for the mid majors. Just one example, Quinn Ewers is going from Ohio State to Texas, so obviously quality of the team is not necessarily the most the highest part of what they're looking at there. In all seriousness, though, I think that there's a chance there for teams to get robbed of talent, but at the same time, it already happens when we look at coaching. So if coaches are able to change horses as fast as they want to and leave a successful G5 or mid-major team and make that jump up to a blue blood team, then I really don't see the problem with players doing it. Obviously, there's some that maybe are taking a little bit of advantage of it in terms of just transfer after transfer between the free transfer through the portal, grad student transfer, that kind of thing. There's some guys that have bounced around quite a bit. But overall, I think it's only fair for the players to have a little bit of freedom in where they want to play and who they want to play for.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo that in some regards. As much as it annoys me to see some players leave a program after they've had some success there to try and grab something bigger, I sympathize with the fact that, a lot of these guys, most of them, want to go to the league. The goal of why they're going to these college football programs is to find a professional career. And, in the end, if they get what they're aiming for, everyone's going to look back and say, yeah, they made the right decision. So if they're using the portal, if they're using the grad transfer rule to further that, I'm not going to fault them for it. Just like coaches, they're in it for money for the most part. There are some that stay at their programs out of a sense of loyalty, and we've discussed some of them, or an increased paycheck, but not necessarily as substantial as they might get at a larger program. But I have a hard time necessarily blaming them. But at the same time, watching what was going on at, for example, Hawaii, it used to be, it's funny, under Rolovich, again, this is pre-Wazoo Rolovich, who kind of created a different characterization for himself. He used to commonly complain about, how the transfer portal was making it tough for him at Hawaii. Now, meanwhile, look what's happening with the current head coach and losing faith in all those players out there. I'm glad they're able to leave, because clearly the situation there, if the reporting is to be believed, is just absolutely miserable for those guys. And we're seeing those players not necessarily jump ship and head over to a P5. Like, as we said, the QB is now gone. Their starting quarterback is now going to be at San Jose State. So I guess there are some benefits to it. Unfortunately, there will, as SRS said, be some people who take advantage of it a little bit, perhaps too much. But I guess that's the good there's a bad you have to take with the good.
Yeah, it certainly allows for a lot more player autonomy, which I think for the long-term benefit of the sport is a lot healthier for these players, for these programs. And even when I think about the mid-majors, there's still a lot of opportunity for mid-majors to play, because one of the things that you hear from a lot of Power 5 head coaches is, well, when a player decides to go into the transfer portal, there's only so many scholarships that somebody else is going to offer. Well, who will always be able to offer a scholarship if they need it? That mid-major program. We see a lot of opportunities, like Nick Starkel when he went out to San Jose State a few years ago and they won the Mountain West Championship. That's a fantastic opportunity of where a mid-major can dive in and find a really talented player to come play for them. So it's not even just, we're going to have a fantastic player at a South Alabama and they're going to move off to a bigger and better program. There's always going to be opportunity if somebody else wants playing time. And that's a great opportunity for teams to actually be able to recruit and build upon their own success as well. I think that's going to be something that we're going to see a lot of mid-majors start to see success, where recruiting from high school is always going to be a part of the game, but recruiting from other teams, especially from these players like a Calzada from Texas A&M, he may not be the automatic starter at Texas A&M, but this is also a guy who is good enough to manage a game to beat Alabama, and he's going to be a fantastic player wherever else he goes. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to see with a lot of mid-majors of, eventually, if you're going to start playing musical chairs with all of these programs, eventually you're going to have only so many scholarship slots. And I think that's going to be a great opportunity for mid-majors to actually improve. So yes, while I do think there is the opportunity of you can play at a mid-major, go off to a bigger school, I think what SRS said hit it right on the head. It's the entire opportunity of you're also going to be able to pull and recruit and build your own program as well. And as long as we've got autonomy for players, just in the way that we have the ability for coaches to have autonomy, because that's the flip side of this. If someone has an incredible year at South Alabama, they can dive out to another program for millions of dollars more than South Alabama can afford. But having players having that same autonomy is where people seem to have a little weird murkiness about it. For me, I'm all in favor of having those players have that autonomy, just in the way that the administrators have that autonomy, the coaches have that autonomy. And I think for mid-majors, I think there's still incredible opportunity to utilize the portal to build their teams and have a better opportunity than what they have right now. So
I agree, definitely. It's funny you bring up Nick Starkel because I'm a senior at Arkansas right now, so I know all about Nick Starkel, with the good and the bad. But
absolutely.
I appreciate it, guys. Woo Pig beat Penn State. Let's go.
Appreciate you. Woo Pig.
Woo Pig indeed. Just to add on to that, JD, you mentioned player autonomy. And that phrase really brings to mind, flipping over to a different sport, the NBA. And a lot of times there you hear fans talking about how they're pro-player autonomy. They want players to have power in terms of deciding where they're going to play. And especially in that league where you have billionaire owners, pretty much every team in that league is worth at least $1 billion. And most of the owners are as well. And most people seem to be in favor of player autonomy until it involves their team losing a player. And then they get a little bit sensitive to the topic. And I think that we're going to see the same thing with college football, is that people are like the idea in general. They love the idea when their team benefits, not such big fans when their team is the one that's losing somebody. So, you always have to take it with a grain of salt, consider what the circumstances are, and just kind of think about the overall picture for the sport and not just a specific team or player.
Yeah, nobody loves the transfer portal right now more than South Carolina.
I think you're right there. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And just to
thank you guys.
Thanks. Just to do a quick station ID, for lack of a better word, this is our CFB Talk. My name is Bob Ekayeri. I'm one of your hosts, along with JD and SRS. We want to welcome any of you who want to chime in. We'd love to hear from you, questions or comments or whatever you'd like. Jorge, I have now sent you the, I guess, I keep using the parlance of Reddit talk, but I've just sent you a opportunity to come up here and talk. Unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
How's it going, fellas?
Hey.
Going well, friend.
All right, so if you couldn't tell from my profile picture, I am a BYU fan. And I just wanted to ask you guys, kind of with this Independence Bowl topic that y'all brought up earlier, how it kind of sucks that BYU, being an independent, doesn't have very much opportunity outside of a New Year's Six to go to a bowl game that's, worth anything. And so my question to you guys is more so looking to the future of the program. How do you guys see BYU fitting into the Big 12? And do you see them being competitive in their first couple of years with the kind of momentum that they have? They just re-signed Kalani Sitake to 2027. Their recruiting is probably the best it's been in 20 years. And so just wanted to hear about that.
I think BYU is set for a great opportunity as they walk into the Big 12 here in the next couple of years. I think one huge question a lot of people had coming into this year for BYU was, they just lost Zach Wilson, the number 2 pick in the NFL draft. How could they possibly replace that kind of production? That's how they're going to replace that type of production. The fact that BYU was able to get a perfect record against several members of the Pac-12, I believe they were, 5-0, 6-0 this year that they went against the Pac-12? 5-0.
5-0.
5-0 against the Pac-12, including the reigning Pac-12 champions, your in-state rival.
That's right.
I think that's an incredible sign of what BYU can do in terms of rebuilding and recalibrating its own talent after losing a Zach Wilson, after repeating the success of what they've had before, and especially with being able to keep Kalani Sitake on staff with BYU when you've got people like Oregon coming in and trying to knock on his door and try to bring him in. I know there was conversations about Washington State, and these other Power 5 programs possibly wanting to come in and take him, but BYU being able to sit and stay to keep him on board, to keep this type of rolling success. I really do see BYU up there with Cincinnati as two teams who could really be on that top echelon, of the Big 12 going into the next couple of years.
Just to kind of echo what JD said, I think BYU has always been poised to be a potentially successful P5 program for a lot of reasons. Obviously, they have a lot of support from their fans. They have a special connection with the community and the Latter-day Saint community, which I think is a positive for them. Historically, they seem to always kind of want to join the Pac-10 and then the Pac-12, and for various reasons, that just never occurred. So to see them get that opportunity with the Big 12, granted, the Big 12 was kind of in a desperate situation, which sometimes that's what it takes, but I think BYU particularly is as good as it's ever been. But going back to what you said at the beginning, you pointed out the classic complaint. Here we have one of the strongest BYU teams ever, and they're relegated is perhaps a strong word, but they're forced to go to the Independence Bowl because as an independent team, they have to make these kind of deals. They have to cut with bowls so that when they do become bowl eligible, they even have a place to go. So in this case, I believe it was, other than the New Year's Six or the playoff, their only chance of going to a bowl was going to be therefore the Independence Bowl. And once they lost that game to Boise State, unfortunately, that pretty much seemed to relegate them to that bowl. I know I mentioned it last week on our Reddit talk we hosted, on the talk we hosted on Reddit, that I went back and looked at the post-game comments on Reddit once BYU had lost to Boise State. And some of the Utah fans were delighting in the ability to tease their rival that, enjoy Shreveport. While at the same time, those same Utah fans were wondering if they were even going to go bowling this year. Obviously, the Utes were able to turn it around and are now headed to the Rose Bowl. But I do say now, as I did then, BYU has always had a peculiar history with bowls, and I think the Big 12 era will remove that. But you have to look back to 1984 when BYU was undefeated, won its national championship. Some of you hopefully are aware of that. BYU won the 1984 national championship. But they had to go to the bizarre situation where they were locked into a bowl. They were locked into the Holiday Bowl, which is where the WAC champion had to go. And they faced a 6-win Michigan team because that was the team that got sent there. And they beat them, and they won the national title. So BYU has always been kind of in this sort of weird historical quirk of getting sent to a bowl that isn't always the most glamorous, even though the team is really strong. And the nice thing about joining the Big 12 is finally the Cougars will get that chance. They're going to have a chance when they go undefeated, and I'm sure they will go undefeated at some point in the future. I'm not saying it's going to be next season. I don't know when that will be, but they will get an opportunity to truly prove themselves with any kind of controversy. JD and I had a lot of talk on this. SRS, did you want to add anything here?
I would just say that out of all the teams that are about to make the jump up to the P5, I think that BYU's in a special place just because of being an independent. We talked about how they went undefeated against the Pac-12 this year. They've already been playing P5 competition more than just what their out-of-conference schedule would allow or a bowl game would allow. So obviously Cincinnati is an extremely talented team. Luke Fickell's doing a great job there. UCF has had a lot of success. Gus Malzahn's familiar with the P5. And again, the same thing with Dana Holgerson at Houston. But those teams haven't been playing the kind of games that BYU has. So I think that they're probably a little bit more poised to succeed there just because their players have that big game experience against those, I guess technically, I mean, they're Pac-12 teams, but technically more talented teams that you would see in the P5. So I think that's going to help ease that transition. They also have a head coach who's been there for a long time, so the stability is going to play a role as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys know a lot more than I expected. Yeah, 1984, and it was kind of weird how they had to go through a 6-win Michigan team to claim that title. But I think as fans, and I'm sure the players and coaches would be much more excited to play in an Alamo Bowl or in a Cheez-It Bowl with these Big 12 tie-ins than in these, kind of crappy, Shreveport, Louisiana Independence Bowls, or, last year was kind of disappointing. I mean, we ended up playing a pretty decent UCF team, but the Boca Raton Bowl in Florida or whatever it was. So yeah, I think we're really excited for that as well. And that's excluding the New Year's Six and even college football playoff opportunities that come with being a Power 5 team.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Jorge. I'm glad we got to talk BYU football because they are one of the more interesting stories I think this season that some have paid attention to, and perhaps not all. But I'm glad we got a chance to talk about that. Thanks again for coming up here and joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.
Yeah. So again, this is RCFB. We are hosting another talk. This is our first talk on Twitter, but not our first talk ever. Just wanted to also mention, while I'm looking over here, one of the bowls that is happening just this weekend that we didn't get a chance to talk about is a Celebration Bowl, which is the HBCU championship game, the historically black college and university programs. We have South Carolina State, but the opponent, Jackson State. I mean, guys, you guys just have to comment on this really quick. We have Jackson State coming in here. Are they one of the hottest FCS programs around? I mean, I'm actually severely disappointed that we don't get to see them in the FCS playoffs. But I know it's important that they have this bowl, although the fact that the two FCS HBCU champs have to go to this bowl is part of the thing that led to North Carolina A&T to jump over to the Big South. But what do you guys think of this game? Who do you think? Is this Jackson State's just to take?
I mean, I think it really is. I think when we saw Deion Sanders come in to take over at JSU, we knew the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth thing that he was hired to do was to bring attention to Jackson State and to HBCUs in general. And I don't think any of us really expected him to be at this point. He had the spring season earlier this year, and now he is now a combined 18-2 at Jackson State, and this year he is undefeated in this season against fellow FCS opponents. I don't think anybody anticipated him having this kind of level of success, and I'm really, really interested to see what happens tomorrow with early signing day. He's already promised that we're going to be seeing some big things out of there. He brought, for example, his son, which was the first blue chip to actually come on to an HBCU in the modern era. I'm going to be really, really surprised with what kind of haul he might be able to bring in tomorrow when it comes to a signing day. But right now, it's really hard to imagine anything else other than success right now at Jackson State, because it's really difficult to see, this almost came a little bit out of nowhere. I don't think anybody had expected this much success, but now that it's just been coming out in droves, it's almost impossible to imagine Jackson State not being able to finish off the job in this game.
Pretty sure Affleck saw this coming because they tapped him to co-star with Nick Saban. So, no, I'll just take the chance to mention, talking about Jackson State and HBCUs, Jackson State is also the alma mater of Walter Payton, which if you watched any NFL game this week, you would know is the namesake of the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award in the NFL for community involvement, and is the most prestigious award of all the NFL awards available.
Just one more bowl game I want to get in, and there's still one more. I mean, actually, a few more we'd probably want to get in before we close tonight. But Lending Tree Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, we got Liberty and Eastern Michigan. Do you have the Flames or do you have the Emus or whatever they are? I still call them the Emus because they really botched the opportunity to rename themselves when they dropped the Hurons. Who do you got in this game?
Every day that they are not called the Emus is a mistake for them. And frankly, it's going to be one of those things of I think everybody expected Malik Willis to have a huge season with Liberty, and it hasn't necessarily panned out in the way that a lot of us expected. But with Liberty being able to come into this game underneath Hugh Freeze, I think they've built something of a foundation there that they have the resources, they have the coaching that EMU doesn't necessarily have. Now, they're going to have at least an interesting time. I'm trying to pull up the spread right now of this game. But when I think of what's going to happen with this game, I think the offense and the offensive game plan that Hugh Freeze is going to bring into this game, it's really difficult for me to see Eastern Michigan, even though we have seen them go against Toledo in a shootout. I don't necessarily see them being able to keep up with the speed that Liberty has and plays with. So I'm going to have to take the Flames in this one.
I think that's probably the safe choice. They kind of faded a little bit as the season kind of ended. They're on I believe a 3-game losing streak. But SRS, did you want to add to this?
No, I think that JD hit all the high points. Hugh Freeze has done a surprisingly good job at Liberty, and you kind of got to feel that that's probably where it's going to be. This is a good season for Eastern Michigan. That gray kind of sad factory feel in the home team or their home field for a lot of years reflected the product on the field. But they've actually had some reasonable success recently. Just don't quite think they've got it this year.
I swear I am the only person that seems to like that gray field. I love watching games on it, but I guess maybe it's because I also like the aesthetics of movies like Pleasantville. I'm not sure. Let's see here. Let's let someone else up who hasn't talked before. And MTPG. I'm sending you an opportunity to come up. Unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you. I think you're unmuted, but I can't quite hear you. All right, we might be having a little bit of technical difficulties there. Well, while we're waiting for that to work out, I'd also like to mention the New Orleans Bowl, which is happening late on Saturday night. It's the game that's going to close us out. We have Louisiana, which is the Sun Belt champ, of course. Only one loss, that opening loss at Texas. Hosting Marshall. I think the one thing this game seems to underline is the Sun Belt needs to improve their bowl standing and their bowl tie-ins, because historically, the Sun Belt was kind of the least of the 5 G5 conferences, so it didn't have very many bowl games. I remember the first Sun Belt media days I covered in 2015. They had a very limited bowl slate, and they were happy to add a few more. And so I think with the most recent bout of conference realignment of the G5 conferences, it's easy to say that the Sun Belt came away the winner in terms of the teams they were able to pull in. The next step they need to do is improve those bowl tie-ins. But JD, SRS, what do you guys think of what's going on in that game?
This is a game that I think becomes incredibly interesting because Billy Napier has now taken the Florida job. If he was still at Louisiana, I would assume that the Raging Cajuns would come in, throttle through Marshall, and just get the job done. But now that they don't have Billy Napier around anymore, I know that their offensive coordinator has been promoted into that head coach position, so they'll have some kind of continued continuity. But when your head guy is out, what does that mean for a program that's trying to go through their practice schedules, that's trying to go through their game planning. For me, this is an opportunity for Charles Huff and his program over at Marshall to make a surprise statement and actually come against the Raging Cajuns and actually make a statement win and actually get an upset. I feel that, again, SRS had mentioned it before in the Utah State Oregon State game of Utah State had come off a big upset win. The defensive coordinator at Oregon State was fired. I feel very similar vibes in this one, and I would actually take Marshall in an upset in this game.
Yeah, I think that it's always kind of hard to predict how these games are going to go when you have a head coach that's left and then an existing coach has been promoted. Either the players can be playing a little bit down because they got typical reactions that anybody would have. The coach left them for somebody else. But at the same time, they could also be fired up to play for this assistant coach that they've been with and who stuck by them. So it's always hit or miss. You got to like Marshall's chances. Don't know if they'll be able to win, but they definitely have to feel good going into this one compared to having to face a Billy Napier-led team.
Absolutely. So let's see. I want to go ahead and bring up at least a couple more people. Let's see here. It's not Wilpon. It's not Wilpon. I believe that's how I'm pronouncing it. So if you get a chance, we'd love to hear from you. Unmute. This is, again, our CFB talk. We love hearing from you. We're here to talk college football, all divisions. Obviously, we have a couple of national championships coming up in Division III with Mary Hardin Baylor and North Central of Illinois, as well as in D2 with Ferris State and Valdosta State. A couple of really exciting games that are coming up this weekend as well, in addition to the pair of FCS semifinal games okay, I guess that did not work. So here, let's see. John France, I'm adding you as a speaker. Let's go ahead and see if this one works. Can you hear us, or can you talk? Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
There we go.
Okay.
All right.
Hi. I wanted to change. Thank you for letting me speak, but I wanted to slightly change the pace and see if you were following the newly minted D1 program in the University of St. Thomas, Tommy's in St. Paul, Minnesota. They're my alma mater. They went 7-3 overall this year in the Pioneer League and lost to, I believe it was Davidson, UNI, and one other. And they seem to be pulling in some good talent. And I've heard talk that their end goal is to end up in the Big East, but it's interesting to see how they've made the jump from D3 to D1 and had what seems to be good success with a D3 team. And their coach, actually, I don't know if you know, but they're the head coach of the of the Los Angeles Chargers actually was the defensive coordinator for them for a year before he transitioned on to another school. So slight connection there, but have you followed them at all?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you actually asked about St. Thomas because RCFB actually has a bit of a media team, and we do cover games and do original reporting. And this is leading somewhere, I do promise. For example, we have someone who's going to be at the Boca Raton Bowl this weekend. Dan Frijoles, Andrew Sagona has always been a good reporter for us. He covered the national championship game in Miami last year. He's going to be at the Boca Raton Bowl. But one of the games I have covered, I covered that last Tommy Johnny game that took place at Allianz Field here in, I live in the Twin Cities as well, so over in St. Paul. So that was an exciting game. If you haven't seen a good D3 football game, I highly recommend it. If you've never seen, I recommend everyone at least go to at least one D2, D3, or NAIA, whatever division program that's near you. If you're not a big follower of those programs, just check one out because it's a different feel, and some of them are quite passionate. Some of them are quite interesting. And so anyway, speaking of that, I was at the final Tommy Johnny game, and those two are big rivals. They filled that stadium, which is an MLS stadium for Minnesota United. The Johnnies walked away with that game, but the Tommies were headed at that point to D1. But so anyway, this was a year for them in the Pioneer Football League. They moved up to D1. Now, some of you out there may know the story. They got good at football, and several of their conference mates are also quite good. Obviously, St. John's, the Johnnies, and Bethel in the conference that is almost entirely in Minnesota. So they got kicked out of their conference, and they were able to kick them out in a very legal manner. And I say this as someone who is actually trained as an attorney. I teach a little bit at the University of Minnesota. So I appreciate game recognizes game. The conference kicked them out by redefining how big a school could be to stay within the conference. There was only one program that did not meet that level, and that was the University of St. Thomas. And there is a bit of a backstory to that. It used to be an all-male school, all-guys school, and it became co-ed and got really large. Therefore, the argument was it just had more benefits, it had more financial support than some of these other smaller D3 schools in the same conference. So they were great at everything. But in football, they were particularly good. And as we know, football tends to pull athletic departments in one direction or another. If you ever doubt that, look at Kansas trying to find a home every time the Big 12 looks like it's about to implode and having difficulty. Despite being one of the best basketball teams ever, they still struggle whenever there's a divisional realignment because their football team does not quite pull the same weight as the other programs in the same conference. So going back to St. Thomas, they're pushed out. They decide we're going to do the unprecedented. We're going to jump from D3 all the way to Division I. They got permission from the NCAA, and they do it. So this year, they did what a lot of programs kind of who are either forced to move all of their programs up to Division I, not necessarily able to support that level of scholarship. They moved their football team to the Pioneer Football League, which is an FCS program, Division I FCS, but is all non-scholarship football programs. Laying all of that groundwork, they went in there and performed admirably. They went 7-3 overall with a 6-2 conference record. And I was following this the whole way through. Sure, when they went and played one of the top FCS programs, that's a scholarship program, at Northern Iowa, they were beaten down pretty handily. But within conference, they shut out Butler. They had a very close loss at San Diego. By the way, for a conference that's non-scholarship, they are spread out all across America. You literally have a conference with the University of San Diego, which is a private Catholic school in San Diego, the Toreros. You have Valparaiso, you have Drake, you have Presbyterian. They used to include Jacksonville, the University of Jacksonville, but they dropped football. So, but they still include Stetson. So you got Florida included. It is one of the wildest conferences out there in terms of sheer size and travel. But they went through all of that. I mean, they won most of their games. The only games they lost were a close one at San Diego in conference, as well as a surprisingly strong defeat at Davidson. But they defeated Drake, they defeated Marist, Stetson, and then the game I wish I could have covered, but I couldn't do it. They finished their season hosting Presbyterian. Now, if you know anything about Presbyterian, they had a weird year where they hired the coach who did not like to punt. I don't say people would sometimes misstate it and say he never punted. No, he did occasionally punt, and goodness sake, he had a punt in quite a few games this year. But Presby going over to visit St. Thomas, I thought was going to be an exciting game. Ends up it wasn't. The Tommies absolutely butchered them 54-15, and their head coach quit because Presby because he just said, I don't know, it just clearly the experiment failed. But so all of that said, as you can all tell from listening to me talk and answer this question, I love St. Thomas football, at least what they've achieved this year. It is absolutely one of the most fascinating stories. We've never had a team jump up from D3 to D1, and I am curious to see where they go from here. I mean, so all of that said, John, tell me more. I mean, I just went off on this tangent. Is that what you were hoping we'd talk about when you asked about St. Thomas football?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I am still in the Twin Cities myself and still follow their football recruiting page. And it seems to be they've actually pulled in some really interesting recruits. I think they've pulled in two quarterbacks out of California, one of which is rated 3 stars by 247. And there's another one I think there's another one out of Colorado as well. But both of the quarterbacks from California are like 6'5". I mean, these guys are legit quarterbacks in terms of rankings, and they're really pulling in some talent. And they've actually had some. They actually have a tight end that's currently on, I think it's the Washington football team practice squad. Also was on the practice squad for the Seahawks. And they've had some success, more than you would expect for a D3 program, especially, well, now D1. So it's really quite interesting to see. And the school is really ambitious in terms of their athletics program. I think they have a top 100 rated basketball player coming in who just signed, and like 3 more that are top 250. So they're really pulling their weight. I mean, they are non-scholarship, but I went there and everybody gets a scholarship in some form. It's called the St. Thomas Award. It just happens to be a little bit more for the athletes. So it's always quite interesting to follow because they've got some really ambitious plans and are really making waves if they can keep this recruiting force up on all their major sports.
I love that you pointed that out because that's always been one of the slightly open secrets for some of the non-scholarship programs is they do give scholarships. They come up with very sometimes generous ways to make sure the athletes get their scholarships in covered. That's actually before they canceled their football program. Jacksonville, the Dolphins in Jacksonville, Florida, were penalized by the Pioneer League for apparently making their scholarships a little bit too athlete friendly. They were clearly aimed at the athletes and not the general student population, so them in a bit of trouble. But I'm interested to see where they go. I mean, is it O'Shaughnessy Stadium? Because I've been to the stadium. I've never actually heard it pronounced, but it's a bit small. That's the one thing I would notice. It's got a really kind of, I mean, I'm an architecture nut. It's got kind of a slightly modern look to it, but it is not a big stadium. So if they ever have ambitions of moving up a little bit further, they might need to expand that a bit. And that is a compact campus in a lot of ways. I mean, unless they want to just go and buy and demolish St. Kate's. Just joking there. But unless they, I'm not sure where they could build unless they want to start borrowing Allianz Field. And one more thing before go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think they do have plans to build some additional buildings. I mean, they have some of the wealthiest donors in the Twin Cities on their board and on their donor list. So they're building a whole new STEM facility just to expand and compete. I think they're opening an engineering school and a nursing school. So they have ambitious plans across athletics and academics. So it's quite interesting. And I hope to see they do well, because I think if they keep on this upward trajectory, they could be in for the big time, and not for big time, but much faster than anybody anticipated from a D3 program. So.
Absolutely. Well, and one more last thing, I just want to tell people who aren't familiar with the Twin Cities. A long time ago, we did a little experiment where we tried to figure out which cities had the most college football programs around them, like any level. We're talking D1, including FBS, FCS, D2, D3, NAIA, JUCOs. Ends up, one of the top 3 was the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, because there's so many D3 programs around it. I mean, most people don't realize that. There isn't just one conference. There's actually 2 conferences with a bunch of teams within that metro area, as well as the other 2 were Boston, unsurprisingly, a ton of D3 schools there, and Los Angeles, which was the runaway winner because there's literally like 3 conferences worth of JUCO programs all within the LA metro area. So they ran away with it with all the D3 schools, a couple of D2 schools, obviously USC and UCLA, as well as like, I think there was 14 JUCOs in that metro area. But just a bit of trivia for you, because that's what we specialize in. Let's see here. I want to let on. Hey, John, thanks again for joining us. I just wanted to reiterate that. We appreciate that.
Anytime.
So, Inc., I'm sending you the invite. I know you are our expert on D2, D3, just about an NAIA. Tell me, what's going on? What should we hear about? I mean, we're heading into the championship weekend in D3 and D2. I mean, tell us about these games.
Well, So you touched a little bit on the D2 and D3 title games earlier. You got D2. You've got Valdosta State and Ferris State. That's a rematch of 2018. It was a really high scoring game in 2018, 49-47, I believe. And so this last week, Ferris State played Shepherd in the semifinals, and they put up 55 points. So there's the potential for another shootout. So Ferris State hasn't lost this season. They were the only team in Division II that hadn't lost before the playoffs, and so I think
who did Valdosta State?
They lost to West Florida in the regular season finale, and then West Florida lost in the first round of the playoffs. Yeah, so
and that's not a weak team. Because West Florida, as I recall, won the national championship a few years ago, in only their third or fourth year of existence.
Yeah, yes, I can't remember what. Yeah, I think it was their fourth year, but they made the title game in their second year. Yes, so Valdosta State had a pretty close game last week against Colorado Mines. It was one of those games where they were kind of keeping them at arm's length, and then it got a little bit close at the end, but it wasn't really that much in doubt even at the end. So that kind of happened.
Who do you have in this game? I have to ask you, between Ferris State and Valdosta State, if you were putting, I'm not saying if you're a betting man, but if you were a betting man, who would you take?
Well, it's hard for me to go against Ferris State given the shows that they've been putting on in the last few weeks. But there's the fact that the Gulf South Conference, it is also hard to bet against the Gulf South Conference in general. But I think I am going to have to take Ferris State, which Valdosta State's won 3 titles before. Ferris State has not won any. Their first championship appearance was 3 years ago. So I'm kind of rooting for them to get their first title.
So how about at D3? We have 2 powers. I mean, the Final Four was interesting enough. We had 4 teams that had won 13 of the last 14 national championships at the D3 level.
It was actually the last 14, unless you count the 2016 title as having been won by no one, which is what the record books will say.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Mary Hardin Baylor. Yeah, I remember that game, and that was. I'm not going to get into the background there, but I wasn't weeping for them for losing that title.
Yeah, it was a kind of I don't know, but I'm not too big on vacated titles, especially in cases like this one. But anyhow, so we've got Mary Hardin Baylor and North Central, who actually, I believe that I looked it up, and I don't believe that they have ever met before. So that's interesting. You've got all these programs that have won all these titles, and 2 of them have never met each other, have never played each other before. So that'll be interesting. So North Central, honestly, North Central looked. North Central, when they played, they had to go on the road against Mount Union, and they came out of there with what was the final score? Hold on a moment.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too lost in the scores here.
Okay, it was.
We're looking
I was trying to
facing off of it.
I was trying to remember
who should we look at here? Who do you think is favored? Do you think North Central is favored to repeat?
Yes, I do think so. I was just checking to see how much they won by. It was 26-13, so I kind of thought of it as being more of a blowout than that, but still, it was that was actually it's interesting looking at North Central's scores for this season. There have only been 3 games, counting the playoffs, where they have scored fewer than 54 points. And those are definitely the 3 strongest teams they've played. One of them was Mount Union last week, and then Wisconsin Lacrosse a couple of weeks ago, and Wheaton early in the season. So they've got a very explosive offense, but it can be slowed down. Meanwhile, Mary Hardin Baylor is Division III has such an imbalance between the top teams and the bottom teams that you're going to see blowouts. Like both of those teams had regular season games that they won 84-6. So Mary Hardin Baylor was slowed down by Trinity in the first round of the playoffs, but their offense picked up in the next couple of rounds. And then they beat Wisconsin Whitewater 24-7. That's avenging a playoff loss from 2 years ago. So both of these teams are undefeated. And North Central, I think North Central is the favorite just because they look to be a better team than they were 2 years ago, and they won the title 2 years ago. But Mary Hardin Baylor is probably improved also, but I'm going to stick with North Central.
So, quick question for you. We also have one other national title game that's coming up this weekend. That's an NAIA. Yep. Who are our 2 finalists heading into this game?
I asked Grandview and Morningside.
All Iowa.
Yep.
That's amazing. Those are 2 Iowa teams. In fact, I think we talked about this last week. 3 of the 4 semifinalists were from Iowa.
Yep. So Grandview pulled the upset in the semifinals over Lindsey Wilson, who just lost their coach to a conference rival. And anyhow, so Grandview is definitely the underdog in this game. And so Morningside has not lost a regular season game in several years. They did lose in the semifinals this spring to Northwestern, but Grandview. I think that Grandview. Sorry, just a moment. Grandview.
So Grandview. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I wasn't sure what I was going to say.
No. I mean, because it's interesting too here, because Grandview in Des Moines, they had a strong season, but Morningside's been there before.
Yeah.
They've won a couple. I don't know how many national. I remember they won.
Yeah, they won back. They won back to back, 2018 and 2019.
So they've been there before. It seems to be in their favor.
Yeah. Grandview has won one, but it's been since 2013, I believe. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
So it's really hard to compare teams across different conferences in NAIA until they get to the playoffs, just because Grandview is in a conference where they don't play any non-conference games, and that also happens in D2. But in NAIA, there's only a couple of conferences that play a significant number of non-conference games. So Grandview, they've been pretty impressive considering. So they beat a pretty bad team in the first round. I mean, Dickinson State, who's from a pretty bad conference, but usually makes the playoffs because they win the conference. So they blew them out in the first round. Then they beat Concordia, who was one of the teams from the Mid-East League of the MSFA. And then they beat Lindsey Wilson. So they have proven that they can beat the top level teams. And Morningside, just a moment, let me find their schedule here. But Morningside has been on another level most of the season. They're one of those high-scoring teams. Grandview isn't really high scoring for most of the time, but Morningside won their first playoff game by 25 and their second playoff game by 37. And then they held off Northwestern, which when they play Northwestern, it's almost always a close game. So Morningside is definitely the favorite, but I think Grandview probably is good enough that they have a chance.
Well, great. I
did also want to touch.
The one shame.
Yeah, I did also want to touch a bit on Division I realignment in a minute.
Sure. Can we circle back to that in a second?
Okay,
I just want to be sure. JD and I want to hit some of these other bowls that we also have coming up, because we've hit almost everything, and we want to make sure before next Tuesday night we hit the bowls that are coming up. JD, I wanted to mention on Monday we have the Myrtle Beach Bowl between Old Dominion and Tulsa. I believe, is this the first time it's happened? I think the pandemic keeps messing with my head. I think we were supposed to have this bowl game. Did it happen last year, or am I just going bonkers here?
I would have to double check that to confirm, but I can definitely at least say for Old Dominion, they weren't in a bowl game last year because they didn't play any football last year.
There was. I'm sorry, there was. Yes, there was. Last year was App State just running over North Texas. Sorry, I apologize about that. I just kind of had a senior moment. I'm not a senior, but I'm close enough among the group of us.
Hey,
but
listen, on the internet, you're an ancient man, but we still love you, and nonetheless.
The joke is, I didn't get internet until I went to college. That used to be a thing. For those of you youngins out there, you used to get the internet when you'd arrive at college, and you'd be excited to be welcome to the wild web, and you get your first email address, and you wouldn't get to keep it because the school would deactivate your email as soon as you were gone. They don't do that anymore. But anyway, I'm not gonna waste time with those age-old mysteries of my time. But Myrtle Beach Bowl, we got Old Dominion against Tulsa. What do you think about that? We got a pair of 6-6 teams. Tulsa, every time I see Tulsa, I just think of how close they got in some games, and yet how they opened to a loss with UC Davis. I mean, they are just a confusing team for me.
Oh, absolutely. The Phil Montgomery era has been a very interesting one with a lot of highs and a lot of lows. That is a valley of a program right now. But I think one of the interesting things that we're going to have to see is Tulsa just lost their defensive coordinator to TCU. So I think this is an opportunity for Old Dominion underneath Ricky Rain for them to be able to open up their own offense and throw in a couple wrinkles that we haven't necessarily seen the Monarchs put together before. And especially with Tulsa having to find a little bit of ways to backfill on their administration when it comes to defensive coaching. This is a really big opportunity for ODU to come in and have an opportunity to actually get a win. I think this is going to end up being one of those games that we're going to see a score and we go, this is interesting. I want to put this on. And we might end up seeing a very weird shootout. I have, for some reason, in my gut, I'm thinking this is going to be one of those weird games where the final score is going to be like a 32-26. And you're going to go, how on earth did they possibly get to those numbers? But I think overall, though, Tulsa, you hit it right on the head when you were saying they lost to UC Davis to open up the year, but then you get a couple of decent wins across the rest of the season. And now you have to replace a defensive coordinator. I think that leaves a big opportunity for ODU. And we'll see what Tulsa does to respond to that. And I know one other game that's also going to be coming up here in the next couple of days. That is going to be the Idaho Potato Bowl.
Spuddy
that's going to be up in. Yes, the return of Spuddy Buddy. And I know that we're going to have some people on the ground up there for that game between Kent State and Wyoming. So what do we know about that game?
Goodness, obviously Kent State, they were able to make it to the MAC title game. They didn't pull it out. That was something that went to NIU. And Wyoming has been all over the place this season. It's interesting to listen, or at least I should say read the comments coming from Wyoming fans after their games. I think a lot of them are a little bit tired of the Craig Bowl era, which is a little surprising because, I mean, some of you may remember Craig Bowl was the coach that brought North Dakota State to prominence in a lot of ways. I mean, several of the national championships they've won were under his watch. They became a dynasty, and he handed it off to his successor, who is now, of course, the head coach at Kansas State. I think I was personally a little surprised that the head coaching job he took was at Wyoming. I know he had some ties to Nebraska, which is not obviously that far away. And that's why he was able to, I think, pull in some of the talent he was for that program. Obviously, they've had some stellar athletes coming through Wyoming while he's been their head coach. However, this season, I know I heard a lot of rumbling. I mean, they had their surprise games. I mean, the funny thing was, I mean, this is an exciting moment for them because one of the side things they have going on is they beat NIU early in the season, and I know we mentioned that earlier on. If they beat Kent State, they will have beat the two WAC division champions in the same season. So the joke is Wyoming could end this season as the MAC champions. One other point I'd like to make: they opened their season with a close win over a very strong FCS Montana State team. That team is also playing this weekend. They are in the semifinals, hosting South Dakota State. We are going to have someone on the ground, actually the same person who's going to be covering the famous Idaho Potato Bowl is going to be in Bozeman covering that FCS semifinal game as well.
Oh, yes, and that's going to be another fantastic game, especially at the FCS level. I got to go see the Bobcats earlier this year during Brawl of the Wild up in Missoula, Montana. They lost that game to the Montana Grizzlies. And even though it was a game where they struggled offensively, they have a cohesion where they're actually able to put together a really strong team effort, and that home field advantage that they're going to get against this Sam Houston State team is going to be incredible for them. Montana, with its thin air and with its cold weather for those Texans, I think that's going to be a huge opportunity, especially with the fact that Montana State sold this game out in its entirety. I know that Bobcats fans are thrilled about the opportunity of getting to a national championship game, and this is going to be an electric atmosphere in Bozeman, and I think that we are going to have a fantastic game on our hands, and it might be one of the best games that we're going to see over the course of this next week.
I'm excited to see it. I can't wait. And I mean, I'm hoping to see Spuddy Buddy. I've actually given direct orders to our reporter that's going to that game to get us some video of that delightful dancing potato. Because if you've never seen Spuddy Buddy, he's just one of those mascots that puts a smile on your face. I mean, Goldie Gopher's probably one of them for most fans. I mean, Goldie makes you happy. There's just some parts of the college football spectrum that just put a smile on your face, and that's absolutely one of them. JD, are there any other topics? I mean, at least have we hit every game that's coming up? Because we hit the I don't know if we want to call it the original, the Tropical Smoothie Frisco Bowl earlier, because that's UTSA and San Diego, and you're going to be covering that game. We never mentioned that. You're actually
Indeed,
going
I
to be
am.
at that game covering it. So we're going to have a little more intense coverage of both the Potato Bowl and the Frisco Bowl, in addition to the Boca Raton Bowl this weekend. So that'll be exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. We'll save some of these other bowl games for next week. I know we just wanted to hit this because these games because they're going to be before late Tuesday night when we need to bring this back. I think we've reached a point where this is getting a bit late. We can always, and I know Inky wanted to talk a little bit more about D1 realignment. We can always bring that up again next week. I just wanted to go ahead and tie this together and thank all of you for joining us. This is our CFB Talk. This is our first time trying this on the Twitter platform. Again, as you can see, the Roman numeral 8. We had done 7 of these on Reddit's way more unreliable, technologically speaking, platform where they basically, I'm just going to say it, they copied Twitter Spaces and they decided to see how it would work on Reddit. Yes, they did that. But it was pleasant to hit this stuff pardon me, trying to hit this stuff. Sorry, I was reading something as I was writing. To give this a go with JD and Sirius and Ink and the rest of our team, and to have Shehan join us, that was wonderful. And I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us here. And we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. And thanks again, and enjoy the football this weekend, because gosh knows we're running out of it. That's the worst part of the season. We know there's only going to be so much left.
The people who complain that there are too many bowl games are the people who don't love football enough. Enjoy every single game that we are going to have for the remainder of this season, because when we get into those doldrums in March, April, May, the summer, you're going to be begging for any kind of football to come back on. And this is the type of football you should be thankful for this holiday season. We wish you all the best here from Reddit CFB. We want to thank again all of our guest speakers who came up today. We especially want to give a special thanks to Shehan Jeyarajah. You can find him at CBS Sports, and you can find him at Shehan Jeyarajah here on Twitter. And thank you to all of you for hanging along with us and enjoying this chat with us. We know that we have enjoyed it as well, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Have a great night, everyone.